It was just before 6 o'clock, and across small American towns, something beautiful was happening. Streetlights flickered on, front porches glowed faintly, and the scent of pot roast or fried chicken drifted through open kitchen windows. Mothers called out from doorsteps, their voices carrying over the sound of children's laughter. Dinner's ready, and like clockwork, the day's rhythm shifted. Bicycles were dropped in the grass, radios were switched off, and the whole family began making their way home. The dinner table wasn't just where food was served. It was where the heart of the family lived. Back then, supper wasn't rushed. It wasn't eaten in front of a screen or grabbed from a drive-through window. It was an event. You could almost feel the anticipation in the air, the slow clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, and the warmth of something steady and sacred. For many families in the 1950s, this was the one moment of the day where everything paused. Fathers returned from work, ties loosened but posture still straight. Mothers brought out steaming casseroles or meatloaf, their aprons dusted with flour. Children took their seats, and not without manners. Sit up straight, don't talk with your mouth full, and wait until everyone's served, were phrases every child knew by heart. There was a quiet structure to it all, a rhythm that taught patience and respect. Even before the first bite, grace was often said, not rushed, but spoken with gratitude. Because in those post-war years, people still remembered the scarcity of the Depression and the rationing of the 1940s. Food wasn't just food. It was a blessing, a symbol of peace and recovery. Do you remember the sound of silverware on china plates? The clinking of glasses filled with milk or iced tea. It wasn't just noise, it was music. The soft kind that said, we're together. We made it through another day. And somehow, those evenings, simple as they were, became the foundation of something greater, lessons in respect, patience, and connection that would stay with people for a lifetime. Because at that table, everyone had a place. And everyone, young or old, learned that respect was served first, long before the meal ever began. Long before the family gathered, the dinner table began taking shape hours earlier, often right after lunch dishes were cleared. In the 1950s, preparing the evening meal was both an art and a daily ritual, mostly led by women who took pride in making supper the centerpiece of the household. The kitchen was alive with rhythm, the chopping of onions, the hiss of butter in a cast-iron skillet, and the hum of an electric mixer that had just begun finding its place in modern homes. Recipes weren't scrolled on screens or printed from the internet. They were handwritten in flour-dusted notebooks or clipped from magazines like Better Homes and Gardens and Ladies' Home Journal. Casseroles, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and Jell-O salads with whipped cream, the classics of the era. It was hearty, comforting food, meant to stretch $1 while feeding a family of 5 or 6. And every step had purpose. Mothers often wore aprons with floral prints or lace trim, and the sound of the oven door closing felt like a daily heartbeat of the home. In many kitchens, radios played softly in the background, Perry Como, Doris Day, or a broadcast from Arthur Godfrey time. Sometimes children would peek in, drawn by the smell of something baking. "Can I lick the spoon?" was a daily question that never got old. There was pride in presentation, too. The dinner table wasn't just functional, it was set with care. A cotton tablecloth, folded napkins, shining silverware, and maybe even a vase of flowers from the yard. Each plate had a place, each fork a direction. And as the day's light began to fade through the kitchen curtains, it was clear. Something meaningful was about to happen. The preparation wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about love expressed through effort. It was about showing respect for the family by taking time to nourish them. Not just with food, but with warmth, consistency, and care. And though it looked simple, that quiet act of service shaped generations. Children learned to wait, to help, to appreciate. Husbands learned to pause before eating and say thank you, because the meal before them was more than a plate of food. It was an act of devotion. Do you remember how the whole kitchen smelled right before dinner was ready? The moment when the table was finally set, and all that was left to do was call out that one word that meant it was time. Supper! That word carried so much meaning. It meant home. It meant family. And it meant that the most peaceful part of the day was about to begin. When everyone finally sat down, something special happened. The noise of the world faded away. The factory hum, the clatter of school lockers, the rattle of bus engines, all replaced by the quiet comfort of voices around a dinner table. The 1950s dinner table wasn't just a place to eat. It was a classroom, a confessional, and a community all in one. Fathers often began the conversation, sometimes asking about grades or chores, other times sharing a story from work. Mothers listened carefully, adding gentle humor or advice. And children, waiting their turn, learned something even more valuable than the words. They learned how to listen. It was where values were passed down without a lecture. Respect wasn't demanded, it was demonstrated. If a child interrupted, a simple glance from their mother was enough to remind them. If they forgot to say please or thank you, a quiet nudge under the table corrected them faster than any punishment could. But between those lessons, there was laughter. Little jokes about the neighbor's new lawnmower. Stories about the family dog sneaking scraps under the table. And the occasional serious talk about the news, when the radio brought headlines from the Cold War, or when a letter arrived from a cousin serving overseas. Families didn't have much distraction, no phones buzzing, no television at the table. So, people looked each other in the eyes when they spoke. That's why memories from that era feel so alive, because people saw each other. Many families had traditions, too. Some read a short Bible verse before eating. Others went around the table, each person sharing one good thing about their day. And while the food might have been simple, roast beef, peas, and maybe a slice of pie, what mattered most was the conversation that came with it. And yet, what made it truly magical was how ordinary it felt. The clinking of silverware, the passing of bread, the occasional, "Could you please pass the butter?" All of it stitched together a sense of belonging that few people ever forgot. For children growing up in those days, that table was their window to adulthood. It taught them manners, empathy, and patience. And for the parents, it was their moment of quiet pride. To see their family healthy, polite, and together. Looking back, the dinner table wasn't just about what was served. It was about who was heard. And maybe that's what we miss most today. Not the recipes or the plates, but the feeling of being truly present with one another, without hurry or distraction. Because around that table, every voice mattered. And every meal was a reminder that connection was the finest dish of all. By the late 1960s and into the 1970s, the sound of the dinner bell began to fade. Televisions had moved from the living room into the kitchen. Frozen dinners, once a novelty, became a convenience. And the quiet, structured ritual that once defined family life began to change. It didn't happen all at once. At first, it was subtle. A father working late and missing supper. A child eating early before practice. A family deciding to eat in front of the Ed Sullivan Show. But over time, the dinner table, once the centerpiece of connection, became more of a pit stop than a destination. Modernization brought comfort, yes, but it also brought speed. More families had 2 working parents. More children had after-school activities. And suddenly, there was no set time for dinner. Microwaves replaced the oven's slow rhythm. TV trays replaced the family table. And conversations grew shorter, replaced by headlines, phone calls, or the soft glow of screens. By the 1980s, sociologists began to notice something remarkable. Families who still ate dinner together had stronger communication, better academic outcomes for kids, and lower stress levels at home. That sacred routine of sitting down, eye to eye, plate to plate, had quietly shaped generations in ways few realized. But even as society sped forward, the memory of those evenings didn't fade. Older generations held on to them. The way fathers carved the roast with pride, the way mothers smoothed the tablecloth one last time before calling everyone in. The memory of simple respect, of not starting until everyone was seated, of waiting to speak, of saying thank you, stayed tucked deep in their hearts. When you ask someone who lived through the 1950s what they miss most, they rarely say the technology or the fashion. They say things like, "We talked to each other more," or "We sat together every night." They remember the smell of gravy thickening on the stove, the sound of laughter echoing off the walls, and the way even small families felt big when gathered around one table. Yes, progress changed everything. But what didn't change was the longing for that feeling. The sense that no matter how busy the world became, there was still a place waiting for you each night, with people who cared that you came home. And so, even as the form changed, the meaning remained. Because while the world grew faster, the heart still remembered slower times. When respect wasn't just spoken, it was shared, one meal at a time. Today, when people think of the 1950s dinner table, they often picture a shining image. A perfectly set table, a smiling family, and the smell of home-cooked meals filling the air. But for those who lived it, it was more than nostalgia. It was the daily anchor that steadied life through both joy and hardship. The truth is, those dinners taught lessons that went far beyond food. They taught the rhythm of family life, the idea that even when the world outside was uncertain, there was always a place to return to. Children learned that being present mattered, that listening was as important as speaking, that respect wasn't a rule. It was a way of showing love. Many who grew up in those homes carry those values still. They're the ones who pause before eating, even when alone, to whisper a quiet word of thanks. They're the ones who instinctively clear the table after a meal, because it just feels right to end the day with order and gratitude. They're the ones who, even now, notice when families sit together in restaurants, because it reminds them of something precious we once all shared. It's not that the past was perfect. Every generation had its challenges, but the dinner table offered something timeless. It gave people a reason to slow down, to connect, to give attention to what truly mattered. And in a world that now moves faster than ever, that lesson feels more valuable than ever before. Perhaps that's why, across the country, families are trying to bring it back. Some have Sunday dinners again. No phones, no distractions, just stories and laughter. Grandparents pass down recipes not for taste alone, but to remind the younger ones what it felt like to gather, to talk, to belong. And as those traditions return, something familiar happens. The room feels warmer, the food tastes better, and people leave the table lighter than when they came. Because deep down, the dinner table was never about the meal. It was about the people sitting around it, and the respect that held them together. So maybe the secret to feeling connected again isn't something new. Maybe it's something old, something as simple as a home-cooked meal, a few kind words, and the sound of silverware against china. The 1950s dinner table may have belonged to another time, but the values it served, gratitude, patience, and respect, are forever on the menu.